Greetings and welcome back to the Protecting the Veil YouTube channel. I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Sister Anastasia, the author of You Are Mine, published relatively recently by St. Vladimir's Seminary Press. I met Sister Anastasia a couple years ago when she was studying at St. Vladimir's, when I went up there to conduct some interviews. Her book's quite remarkable. She has a Substack, Apocalypse. There's a link to her Substack below this video, and I hope you'll enjoy our conversation. So there are many things in the book. There are so many different paths or questions, topics we could touch on. One of the things that struck me in particular, and I think in a sense maybe it gets to the heart of your experience, is the question of freedom and personal agency, and how in Christianity there's this kind of paradox where on the one hand we give up our personal agency, but we freely choose to embrace Christ, to embrace the cross, but then we have this kind of deeper experience of freedom. I was wondering if you could speak about your experience coming into Christianity and your relationship with the idea of freedom.
Well, that has always been for me the most important thing, the central thing. It is of everything that happens in the book and that drove me to do the different things that I did in my life in the lead up to encountering Christ. It was always about freedom. I was so aware from, I don't even know how young, but very young, that like there's something wrong with this situation. The way it is not how it's meant to be. I should feel differently to how I feel. Like that was always my experience. And as I grew up and that sense of imprisonment intensified through the things that I went into and things that I was led into, and the binding of the mind and its destructive outworkings in terms of misuse of creation for therapeutic purposes and self-medication, I became less and less free and more bound. So in the drive towards what I always termed as healing, was really like this need for freedom. And I was like, I have to get free, and I'll do anything to get free. At the same time, I don't know, maybe my personality and also the way I was brought up, like there's this freedom there, like my parents have these free spirits, and so that was always encouraged and allowed. So I kind of had this tension between, on the one hand, freedom within my sensorial experience of life and enjoying it and feeling like the possibility of life on earth, but then the binding of the addictions. And so when I began to kind of hone in on how I could find that result that I was searching for of freedom, that the answer for me came through sacrifice, though I didn't term it as that. It was through abstinence, and that was through the process of getting clean from addiction. And that wasn't something I preconceived, but when it began to happen and I started to practice abstinence or attempt abstinence, and I wasn't successful, but I was able to do some things, I started to, it was like this key that unlocked my whole reality. And I was just like, oh, like this is what I was searching for. Okay, so in order to be free, I need to not do. I need to not have this. I need to not experience this. I need to not go there. I need to not receive this. I need to not eat this or drink this or do this. And that was like something completely new, boundaries. At the time, I didn't know I was having an experience of God, who is the God of boundaries. Christ is the God of boundaries. I didn't know I was having that experience of him coming to me through the program, through like something that was secular, because I was not able to, I wasn't going to the church. I wasn't even thinking to go to the church, although I still prayed. So that was like the beginning of my real taste of freedom, was through abstinence. And then as I began to increase in abstinence, I became more spiritually tuned, because I, well, in a way, like, you don't have anything else to do because you're not doing anything else. So you naturally, your senses start to enliven in that area, and you become aware of things that you weren't otherwise, because you're sober as well, and awake and alert and not in bed or not out of it in some ways. So it was, yeah, that was the first real taste. And that led me then, I guess, through this path of asceticism, although I didn't call it that, in the world that I was in, going through the different world religions, searching for Christ unconsciously. I didn't talk about asceticism. I think the word was around sometimes, but it was more just like, again, instinctive, and that's why I loved the things that I did do, and why I was drawn to some traditions more than the others, because they were ascetic, or they had this level of like sacrifice and discipline, and being strict and being restrictive, and but it was nothing compared to then when I then encountered Christ, when I came to the monastery for the first time, and I saw the nuns and how they lived and what they did, and it was just something completely. Not only was it more than everything that I had done before or seen before, but it was just, there was something different about it. It was like, every single part of it, nothing was left no rock was left unturned. Like, there was no part of you that couldn't be touched by it. Whereas in the other forms, and there was this kind of, it looks like to the outside as if you're being really ascetic, but obviously then there's still the retention of whatever is in your heart that doesn't need to be touched because of different beliefs around what is good and what is not. So then, yeah, it was like having drips of freedom, and then opening up through Christ and realizing, okay, so not just in Christianity and not just asceticism or Orthodox asceticism, but in Christ himself, I'm free. And that is, I guess, the answer to your question is, there is no freedom outside Christ. And when you are in him completely, then you are completely free. And to the outside eye, you look completely bound. But inwardly, which is the higher reality and which is the more important reality, you are completely free. And that was then obviously put in front of me as the thing that, oh, okay, so this is what I've been searching for, and this is what I'm going towards, and this is what I'm still going towards.
Yeah. Well, and I think something that a lot of people miss is that at any given second, you can decide not to. You can walk away, and so you're always free to embrace the cross of asceticism, the cross of obedience, the cross of following the Christian path or not, and that is one of the highest. It's a foundation for Christian spiritual life. Without that freedom, then none of it matters.
Yeah, I think that's obviously what's one of the main things that's misunderstood about Christ, is that that there's any form of oppression involved. I mean, and then him and his personhood and who he is, he's so gentle, so respectful of those who don't respect him, so gentle towards those who aren't gentle to him, and he is always just so tender, like the lamb, the little slain lamb, like that is his identity as revealed to the world. And he want to work with us, but will never. It's just like a love that is so far beyond our understanding, and so different to what I had learned and heard and been taught, and what we say about the God of Christianity.
On Sunday, after a coffee hour, I spoke with a lady who had read your book, and she had a similar stories, kind of a similar background, and she mentioned, and I wanted to see if you feel like this is true for you, that for her at least, it was important that she went through the experiences that she went through, had kind of the spiritual experiences, that she would have never have become Orthodox. Well, I think she's a catechumen, but she would have never been looking for Orthodoxy if she had never kind of strayed. I think she was brought up Methodist, and there would have been no reason for her to seek, at least for her personally. And this isn't to recommend that anyone go down this path, but do you feel like for yourself that it was an important step, or and maybe this is a terrible question, it just kind of came to me, because I certainly don't want to be encouraging people to go down this path, but
no, it's a really good question. It's also a really hard question, and it's one that I've asked myself many times, of course, across these past 5 years. It is, yeah, I think it's a difficult question, but there's always, it's good to like go towards those difficult places, because Christ does always have the answer, but sometimes he might reveal it in different ways or at different times, and you're not necessarily going to know immediately. And often we want to understand it in our mind, but he wants to reveal it to us in our hearts. And so basically there's a few different things going on with that. And okay, talking about myself, because I obviously don't know this woman, but as I sort of continued on in this path, and everything that happened in my life following my conversion and what's now happening, of course, it's so clear that it was all like under divine control, and that everything that happened was for this purpose, that I can do the work that I'm doing now for the benefit of others, for the benefit of God's kingdom. Like, that's obviously there, and that's why it makes sense. But I guess what I'm trying to touch on is that there is some things that are almost God's property, metaphysical like property, in terms of what as humans we can and can't know, and can and can't say is and isn't right. And Saint Sophrony went through a similar path as me, in terms of he went into Eastern religions, and there's this quote, and he says, like, the fact that I did what I did is something that I will regret till the day that I die. And Saint Sophrony, so he obviously has an insight and awareness that I don't have yet. But as these years have gone on, I've sort of been able to sometimes get glimpses, more and more of that, because the thing with the world before, say, it's so covered, even though I was able to write the book and wrote everything that I wrote in the book. And that was still obviously just a small percentage, very, very small percentage of the information that I have and had. still so much covered, because God doesn't want me in a way to even know or think about or have kind of access to some things. So it's like, I believe that God, well, and so, okay, that's another part. So another part is that we often look at our life and think like all these bad things happened, and like it was so, all these, wrong paths were taken, it should have been like this, should have been like this is kind of like unfair and wrong, completely forgetting that God in his sovereignty was there, and Christ was there, and he was leading us the way that he was leading us, and as much as he is with us now, he was there as well. And so we need to like let go of this sorrow and also of this almost like complaint. And I think about some people that I know, and for example, on a practical level, there was no way that I could have, and I think this is something that the sister was touching on, could have transitioned from where I was straight into the church. I just wouldn't have considered doing such a thing. It wasn't even in my framework. Or from the world that I was in before entering into any spiritual reality at all into the church. But I could go into nature because that was the next step. And so the Holy Spirit, he led me through, and I write about this a lot across both books. I'm working on the second book now. He led me through something that I could first conceive, and it was like on a grosser level. It's like nature itself, physical, and then through that was then able to do enough purification to then open himself up into the more subtle realms of himself, without nature being the conduit, but still being there and loved. So I think that's also another part of it, and I think this is very something that happens a lot with women, actually, because of the misunderstandings around Christian relationship with the feminine gender and around treatment of women and what's happened historically and what's said about Christianity in the world, which is not necessarily even true and isn't a lot of the time true about in regards to gender. So nature is something I think like safe that that Christ uses in order to draw women into their spiritual part of themselves, and then he can work with them with less obstruction. So those things are all there. But I guess the only thing I was just going to add is that a lot of the time, because my thought was always the same, it was like, I had to go through that, it was good, therefore it was the right thing that happened. But then I thought about some things in my life and things that I struggle with and things that have tormented me across these 5 years, still things that I was struggling with before and then have continued to work through and that God is working through. And I was thinking, like, if I had not done what I'd done, if I'd grown up in the church, like a lot of these things, I wouldn't have had to go even like deal with them with Christianity. They would have ceased to exist. So we can't underestimate the blessedness of what it means to live in the kingdom and in the blessedness of Christianity, of being a Christian. It's the highest reality. And even though I understand the question completely and I have explained the things that I've explained, first and foremost, obviously, actually, it's always better to have been with God only, but maybe in some cases he'll make exceptions. But that's not for us to determine and decide, though we can attune our minds to his mind retrospectively.
Yeah, it's a mysterious thing. The temptation is, as humans, to look at things from a human perspective, being able to kind of humbly walk away from one's own perspective and just accept what God has allowed and try to live in the present.
One thing I was going to say in terms of what you just said, I think that this is like hits on the kind of like absolute point for Westerners with our experience, and maybe also the human condition as a whole, but like particularly for us, like it's so hard to be intellectually innocent because of the way that our psyches are cultivated in our culture and how we're brought up to lead with the mind. And that was for me one of the hardest things in my time in the church and being in Christianity, of like this kind of do not touch, do not look, like do not, look down, don't look side to side, don't know the answer, be innocent, allow yourself to not know, like these parts, and especially in monasticism as well, of course, with the humbling and the crucifixion of the mind, which is the main part of monasticism, and like that kind of losing control and intellectual surrender is so difficult for us and is terrifying, because we are conditioned from the beginning to prioritize and elevate our minds and control reality through our minds, even though we're not actually doing so, but to a degree in some ways we do. And so that aspect of Christianity, and that's what makes people from the outside think that Christianity is naive and stupid and childish. And accepting the misjudgment and not correcting it and not saying, let me bring you down a few pegs and use my intellect to throw you down through all the complexity and the depth and the, intellectual profundity of Orthodoxy, of Christianity that is also there, but to not do that and to allow yourself to be kind of, trampled on is so hard. And yeah, I just think that's an important thing, because this is something that we're all dealing with.
Yes, well, and it's also something that greatly differentiates Orthodoxy from Western Christianity. Most expressions of it, at least. There's this tension in the West, in particular, between that picture of Christianity that you describe, which is Orthodox, and this other kind of triumphalistic cultural Christianity that wants to shove things down people's throats and not respect their freedom, and not do so in a way that allows for the Spirit of God to work on them slowly. And that's, I think, a big temptation for a lot of people coming into Orthodoxy, who come from probably especially kind of Reformed backgrounds. They bring this kind of baggage in an approach to Christianity that can be hard to shed. So you discussed freedom and personal agency vis-a-vis your experience in coming in to Christianity, and then also just in your life experience. I was wondering if, spiritually speaking, what have been some of the other most important lessons that you've learned in your journey into Orthodoxy?
So the main thing, I think, what it all comes down to, and where kind of every argument finds its conclusion, is in the person of Christ, in him as a living being, as a living spirit. And if I could think about probably like the most potent thing that I received from my elder and from my guides, is like that closeness with him, and that he is alive and he is here with us and he is active in this world. And when that relationship is cultivated and that sense is cultivated, a lot of the temptations that you spoke about just now, and other temptations, are really their root is really yanked out, because when we are relating to him in that way, it's like so many arguments, so many thought processes, so many things that you would otherwise do and are legitimate, are lawful, but is it actually the best thing I can do right now in order to just be delightful to him and to reflect him, this Holy Spirit who's in front of me and showing me what it means to be divine, but also what it means to be human. And so I think God's divine simplicity and the simplicity that he offers us to live in, if we're willing to accept it, is just so healing of the mind, healing of all the drives towards making that naturally we make our lives and our interpersonal experiences extremely complicated. But if we instead seek his simplicity and now just allow ourselves to rest in it, and knowing that he will heal this rift, he will take care of this technical issue that's happening, he will be with me, and as I go from the most heightened environments and grand experiences to the smallest things in my life, and he is there with me, and the lower I go, the more vibrant and potent his presence and the closer he is to me. And so, my whole life and the life that the world is in spiritually and going towards more and more in these days of the empowerment and the rising up of oneself and the worshipping of oneself and the elevation of the self, and this idolatry that negates the possibility of being able to have any kind of access to him because it's blocked out because of the pride. Everything that was in my life in that way was stopping me from receiving his healing because I was worshipping myself and I considered myself to be divine. And that was the message again and again, both in the spiritual context and in the secular context, although it wasn't about being divine, but it was about being obviously just the center of your reality and just do what you need to do for yourself. And so sacrificing the self is the hardest thing, obviously, to do, but through Christ being there close and offering his, not just his love, but his watching you as you are suffering in self-sacrifice and showing you I understand because this is what I also did and it hurts a lot and it's not easy, but if you do it, then you can receive the freedom that I have, and you can have what I have that you don't have, which is divine love, unconditional love. And so those things, the words are bandied about and were in my world, but it was only through humbling the self in front, not just conceptually, because we talk about humility in all these traditions and in the world that I was in, but it's actually putting it into practice with real people in front of you, where you say, okay, I'm wrong, you're right. Your way of being is better than my way of being. Let's do what you think is the right thing to do, not what I think is the right thing to do. Again, it sounds simple, but living that out on a daily basis completely changes your inner reality, changes your mind, changes your heart, but it's so hard to do. So, yeah, him leading one through that process of humbling through his own example is the thing that differentiates it from everything else.
Yeah, that's a pretty good segue to another topic that I wanted to ask you, which I imagine is, I don't know what your new book's about, but I hope at some point maybe you'll go more deeply into feminism, and because it seems from your book that your experiences in a lot of ways were tied up with feminism And I was wondering how your relationship with feminism has changed.
Yeah, a lot. Look at me, I'm an Orthodox nun. So, yeah, I mean, feminism was the thing in my life. It found its spiritual manifestation, but feminism was like my first religion, and I loved it so, so much. It was like the solution to all the problems, and it was the answer to all my questions. And it was, handed to me on a platter, like, you're right and they're wrong. So when you have low self-esteem and you hate yourself and you are living a bad life and doing lots of bad things and hurting other people, and you know that unconsciously but not consciously, to be presented with a packaged, set of beliefs that emphasize, your rightness is something obviously that's very alluring.
And as well as it seems like it absolves.
Yeah, all response. Yeah, exactly. And so, but before I want to carry on that line of thought, but before I say that, I want to say the topic of gender is so deep, so real and important in this time, and so touching on what a lot of us are talking about and feeling at the moment. I'm not in those conversations, but I can sense them in my spirit, and I know, because I was so immersed in it. And I think so the first thing to say on the topic of gender is that God loves us. God loves men and God loves women in a way that we cannot begin to understand, but we can know it and experience it, but we cannot understand the level of love. And I just want to say that because it's easy for these conversations to become very intellectual and also to come combative. And if we remember that everything in the scriptures and all its mystery and what it says about gender and what about women and about men, some of which is so easy to digest and some of which is so hard to digest, so bitter, like the most bitter medicine. If we remember that this is from the God of love, that God is love, and everything that is put in place by the church and upheld, or by God and upheld by the church, is for the benefit of us because God loves us, it really does change how we approach the conversation. And we need to experience that love. That's the first thing. And we need to experience that love, and we need to experience it. And the way we can experience it is through having this personal relationship with Christ, because he's going to pour that love into our hearts. As he pours that love into our hearts, not only will the wounds that generate the need to find those answers in the first place heal, but it's like even the desire for the answers disappears, because you're filled with something that's also giving you knowledge that you can't ever get through mental, searching for the answer to that question. It's something so deep because it's something so instinctive. But so that's the most important thing to say. But yes, and so in terms of feminism, well, so finding such healing in feminism it was real because I was confused by experiences. And I think the most important thing that we need to talk about with feminism is obviously sexual violence. Like, this is why women are drawn into feminism, is because they're trying to make sense of their experiences, trying to understand how something like that could happen, trying to look at the source and figure out basically how can I make sure this doesn't happen to myself again, to anyone else again, to my children. And that aspect of it kind of touches on something that I think we can see, that, like when you're traumatized, you are behaving in a way that you think is sane and makes sense, but it doesn't. It's your activity is trauma generated, but it's invisible to you. And something that, we don't talk about enough, maybe because we don't, or maybe we're going to be talking about it more, or people are talking about it and they can invite me into conversation, is like that the feminism is this coping mechanism for unresolved sexual trauma. Like, that is what feminism is. It's like, I was disempowered. I wrote about this recently. I wrote about how in ancient world used the word disgrace to talk about a woman being raped, and saying like that it's about, she's degraced. Like, her grace is taken away from her. It's taken from the place that it was put by God. And she knows this, but she doesn't have a language for grace. So instead it's about power, more modern, like in terms, like in the modern world, we're talking about in terms of power, but there's something that's been taken away from her and she's covered in shame. And that shame, no matter how much power you give yourself in the world, and no matter how much power you acquire, whether it's in terms of your worldly circumstances and working your way up and having this huge career and working on being in charge of a lot of people, whether it's having this really egalitarian relationship with a man who you really like run the show, or it's equal in every way and you don't feel in any way subject to him, and there's the power's either equal or you have more power. No matter how much you soothe yourself with the modalities that come along with feminism, because the secular feminism and the spiritual goddess worship is super intermingled and they feed into each other, and it's very easy for one to go into the other, and normally there's not too much disagreement between them, though maybe spiritual feminists or goddess worshippers or those who cultivate and are interested in the divine feminine are going to have more questions about secular feminists' approach to things, and seeing that they have some resolved issues that are not dealing with at all in the way that like spiritual feminists are. But no matter how much you use those things, and you have these circles and you talk about how yourself is being divine and that you are beautiful and lovely and wonderful, and you worship yourself and you deserve all these things, and you have a right to have what you want and have pleasure in this way and all these things, it never is going to take away from what happened inside you. It's never going to heal that internal wound, because that internal wound is something that's spiritual and it's rooted in the economy of Eden, and only God has the power to restore that thing that was taken, and that's what Christ does. And that is why women are able to go from being feminist, as I was, to being an Orthodox nun, or being, with a veil in church and agree and seeing their husband as the head, and all these other things that are triggering about Christianity for many women, understandably so in lots of cases, and need to be unpacked on a kind of case by case basis. I mean, always the underlying point is the same, and it's still the God of love. But there's things that, it's important to look at it and to be open in the way you speak about it, and not just shove it down someone's throat. But it's only through the healer healing you that you will get free from what happened, and otherwise you're going to be continuing to operate from that traumatized place, however unconsciously, because you're seeking power that you lost.
Yeah.
So but it's the wrong power. We need the power of the Holy Spirit, not worldly power, because no worldly power can heal spiritual trauma, basically. It's good. Okay, so I want to speak about that because it's important. So in terms of soft power, well, I think that's the thing that's sort of so radical, obviously, about Christianity, is because ultimately there is so much soft power in Christianity. In fact, there is. I mean, that is what it's predicated on. I mean, Christ was crucified. He has presented himself as the Lamb. we are asked to become brides, you know, it's like, it's there laid out all across the scriptures. And like the books, some of them have stronger masculine principles, some of them stronger feminine principle. And it's so much more nuanced than we think about in the way that we think about it. And obviously some books, you know, it's God, because God is obviously beyond gender and is able to, you know, is like bringing both of those things, but has like God the Father as the source, is allowed to, he's ministering to every part of us, knowing that all the different parts of us need different things, but knowing also that men have this softness in them that needs to be cultivated and spoken to, and women have this power and this fire in them that needs to be cultivated and spoken to, but that in order for them to live in harmony together as embodied beings in the world and the creation in the order that he's created, that there's also these certain things that need to be in place. And so he's put the plan in place in order that we can just experience the blessedness of being alive. So I think that, you know, what the church represents is the power of soft power. I mean, she always, her role is in the unseen primarily. And so what she's doing is not even known by anyone really, like in the world. And then there's the small part, which is the more political side, and it might be more instrumental in some countries than others, in some nations than others. I mean, thank God when she has more power in a certain nation, because that nation's going to be in a better situation than when she doesn't. But the main thing that the church is something that is unseen or known, and that is the witness also of the monastic, is like, it's hidden. It's this hidden mystery. It's this hidden life of love, of sacrifice, of love, of prayer. And that is something that all Christians, not all Christians are called to be monastics, but we're all called to be consecrated to God as in holiness. And that is something that's commanded not even just of all Christians, but of all human beings. And so, you know, feminism is like psychology. Like, a lot of what it's saying is true, and it's able to locate the problem, but it doesn't present the right solution. And a step further is some of these terms that we're hearing that are helpful. Like, yeah, they're helpful because they're connecting to a spiritual reality that's laid out in the scriptures and that's upheld and witnessed by the church, basically. So what we can do in order to receive the fullness of their blessing is to go to the source, which is the church itself, which is Christ himself. And then not only will we receive that cultural shift that will come through living in a more godly way or observing God's commandments, whether we know that we're doing so or not, and whether we describe it as that or not, but because that is what a lot of, say, the women who are working in order to shed light and uphold the truth of the things that do happen in relation to gender and where they're wrong and where they need to be witnessed, but doing so in a way that is harmonious with God's will for the world and for his creatures. And that's what these women who are what they're doing at the moment. And this is really amazing work and really needed. And it's not a coincidence that it is happening at this time and that there is this flourishing. Because obviously it's also a backlash against the, you know, decadence of what has taken place and how it's progressed to its logical end and what we see in other forms of feminism. And so, you know, ultimately, like, most women engaged, I was more militant, but like a lot of my sisters who would have called themselves feminists and would be like, yeah, for the cause, and gone on marches, but they cared up to a point, and then they were like, I just want to go be with my boyfriend and have a good life. Whereas it wasn't so much like the mission and the text and the changes that we need to make on, like, you know, like this all-consuming crusade. So, you know, I think women instinctively know what God created them to do, which is to have this role in reality that's so, so important of cultivating this nucleus of peace and joy and blessedness in which children can grow, and in which, and of course this could be spiritual children, it's not necessarily, you might be called to celibacy and you might have this calling, but generally if you don't, that's also your work. It's about responsibility. It's about being humble in the face of reality, natural reality, and being like, okay, this is who I am. This is how God created me. I don't need to worry about if it's wrong, because it turns out that it's definitely right, because God is the one who made it happen in this way. So therefore I can put all of those years wasted in thinking about this thing and stressing about this thing, and the hatred is cultivated through all the things that I read in order to try and understand this non-problem and live my life in a way that blesses others. And that's why I think that's the main thing, is it comes back to self-sacrifice. Because however you slice it, and whatever validity there is in the reason why these ideas about, like, say, the sort of main feminist precepts and about the patriarchy and what needs to be done in order to oppose it and to change it, like, women don't know that they have a role, both obviously in terms of practical, and that's the work, and that's the hard work, and that's the side of it, obviously, that understandably that was resisted and is still being resisted in terms of the domestic, but also that you have a spiritual role, both in terms of as a parent, but in terms of your role in the community, your role within worship, the prophesy, like your prophetic role as women, and your instinctive understanding of bridal love, and your ability to surrender to Christ in a way that is sometimes really hard for men to do, and to be a bride and to read the Song of Songs and just know, I totally get this. This is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing in my spirit in order to be united with my Creator in a way that might not be necessarily as easy for a man to kind of comprehend. And there's just so much wonder about it. It's just such a wonderful thing to be a woman, and to be able to connect with your spiritual role as a woman, specifically in a gendered way. And I think obviously because we're not taught this, and the things that have been silencing to women and putting aside the violence and degradation, of course those things so destructive, but just the pushing aside and the not listening for the opinion and not wanting to know, and devaluing and decentering, and those things, have overtaken those other aspects of what it means to live a mystical, spiritual life, but an embodied life, and one that is real in the world, and that your gendered role works on both levels and needs to be cultivated on both levels and understood on both levels. I mean, bringing children into the world and cultivating them in the early stages of their life is the highest honor. It's what God does. It's what God did to us. It's so beautiful, and it's something that needs to be done well.
Are you familiar with this quote from C.S. Lewis about essentially everything that human society does should be focused on one thing, which is to support women and childbirth and the upbringing of children?
Yeah, because also this is the other thing, is like, there's so many things to talk about on this, because it's so deep. But this is the other thing, is like, what made me so upset after leaving that world and coming into the church and being in a completely different environment where gender was not thought about in the same way at all, or discussed in the same way, and seeing like how much feminist ideology flattens the masculine and kind of creates this mythical idea of what a man is and what he wants and how he is and his needs and all he cares about. And my life, things are put in place that completely confirmed those lies. So I really thought they were real because I had lived experience of them with people. It wasn't just in a book. But what was so amazing about like these years with Christ, obviously Christ himself being this divine man, but just all the wonderful things that I was able to then discover in the masculine. And I always had a good relationship with men. Like I always felt such a strong understanding with women and felt for them and like just loved women. But I also felt such a strong understanding with men and loved them. But that was combined with this battle that was enforced by what I read and what we spoke about and my own trauma. And not having that as being an issue, then when I was then in the situations that I was in, these like holy environments, and being with those who were cultivating sacredness in their lives and living according to God's commandments, you know, I was just like falling in love with the masculine as it was created, as it is, like, and feeling all these things I never thought about, of like gratitude to men and wonder at them and like, wow, they are so strong. Like, this is amazing. Like, we need men as well. Like, they gonna care for us and look after us and protect me and support me and raise me up and give me all the things I want. So like, you know, those are all wonderful things and those are all available to women. And it makes me so sad that so many women are like, it's like you're shooting yourself in your own foot. Like, you're the problem. And this is something that came up with some of the work I was doing when I was transitioning out of the old world and still sometimes doing like therapeutic work or coaching work. And I just started to notice that with all my female Western clients, still when we would be talking about like what problems in their relationship, and I would always just get to the same thing. I'd be listening to them and they'd be like on their self-righteous bent. And I was just like, your boyfriend sounds lovely and you're the problem in your relationship. And the reason why the problems are there is because you don't respect him and you don't treat him with respect. And it was just interesting when I was able to say, I wouldn't say it in that sequence with that much information, but just like lead them into kind of understanding of like, no, I don't respect him. And you can't expect love from someone who you don't treat with respect. And so like, I think that in the same way that abortion degrades the women, like, so also these ways of thinking, these thought processes and what they cultivate in the heart and the bitterness in the heart, which completely negates the possibility of Christ's indwelling, and the pride, like, they degrade what it is to be a woman. And the most important thing is they block you from having access to the thing that's going to change your life and heal you, which is the bridal love with Christ, who is the healer.
You touched on abortion. How has are there other ways in which your understanding and thinking about abortion has changed since becoming a Christian?
Yeah, that was something that was sort of such a strong process, because it, like, I'd always, for example, my father is a abortion, like, he was always like a pro-life campaigner. So I grew up with like this awareness of this, and as I grew older, I started to oppose it, like as a teenager. But I wasn't someone that my friends would consider to be like able to talk about their abortion. Like, they would be like, I don't know how she feels about it, even though I would intellectually argue with him. Like, in my heart, I was just like, that was something really deep. Like, that was something that just like shouldn't happen. But then obviously becoming more intellectual secular feminism, like, where it's so strong, that was kind of like stamped out also because of the like need for social affirmation and sharing the same views as everyone around you and not wanting to be different. And then going into the healing world, actually there's like quite a few different views on it. It's not just one thing, but obviously in a lot of the religions, it's not something that you're going to see as being like celebrated or in the way that it is in secular feminism. But there's more room for, understanding case by case basis. And then and also in the pagan world, but there's some very strange practices around it, and sort of, in certain corners of that world, it's something that's sort of ritualized. But in that world, I still maintain this intellectual view. And because I remember when there was the law change in Ireland, and then everyone like was talking about it on social media, and like I think my point was basically like, obviously, like it's not the right thing, but obviously this is better. And in my mind, it was like oppression of women is like the thing that needs to be fought more than anything else, and this is maybe like a casualty, and the way to that, them finding that liberation, I didn't put in those terms, that was kind of like the thought process. And I remember like there was a really frosty response to me talking about it in those kind of intellectual terms, and just not celebrating it, but like agreeing with it basically. But with Christianity, it was a little bit of time, like a couple of months, before God started to touch really into that. And when that shifted, when I kind of was awakened to what I had been doing, because I used to work with women who had abortion trauma, and all my work with womb work and like women's work, and it was, body work, it kind of all like that came up a lot. And I actually had some sessions I talk about in the book of things that I used to do in order to help people process their emotions and their bodies in that way. But that was this like a shift that couldn't be unshifted. And when God showed me what I had been doing as being wrong, and started to show me, it's like you can't go back, because then when you see God as creator, and that I was formed by his own hands, and that his love for me is like, this is true for everyone, and this is true for everyone who is created. So I had a really strong then shift, and became like completely pro-life and completely like not hardline, but like there wasn't really any like room for nuance, and there still isn't. But I would probably be able to talk to people about it in a way that might be different than others who don't have that experience or don't have the same background, who aren't women. But I think that a lot of the elders and in the church, a lot of those who are in monasteries, they talk a lot about the things that are happening in the world and Christ and what's happening with abortion, and how there's connection between his anger about this, basically. And so it's something that's very real. And I think that also what is so telling is that, okay, so I had a lot of clients who came from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and they had different beliefs, but obviously they were all kind of spiritually focused. And then there were some who weren't, but who were open to female work. And I just remember, I realized like every time, say I'm just giving them a massage, so this is a massage therapist, and no matter what beliefs that they held, how feminist they were, how pro-choice they were, how much they considered it to be just like not a big deal at all to have had an abortion, or spoke about it in really cold terms. When I started to do the massage work with them, as soon as I would get to the part of their body, like as soon as I'd get to their stomach and my hands would move to that part of their body, no matter who they were, no matter their beliefs, the same thing would always happen. They would always start crying. And so like, it's like there's this disconnect between the heart and the mind very, very much in this area. And this is like the deep knowing of the soul, the deep knowing of the spirit. And this is the knowledge that God has of us and what he's speaking to us through his scriptures and trying to make us understand in terms of his laws. It's like I'm talking something that's deeper than your mind, and I know something that's bigger than your mind. And this is the place that we need to focus in terms of the conversation. Not doing what I see happening, which is a kind of like, we want to show women that the church is accepting of women, and therefore we can be more like diluted about how we talk about this in order to draw women in or to make them feel accepted and not judged, which is important. They need to feel accepted and not judged, but not through in any way diluting what Christ is saying. And because it will not lead to life, and we don't have the right to do that. Only God has the right to forgive people of that sin.
So again, kind of a good segue into another section, a topic that I wanted to discuss with you, which is you touch on it in your book a little bit. I mean, mostly, I think, wisely. The spiritual guidance you were receiving was to not necessarily seek out these conversations with friends from the previous life that you had before becoming a Christian. And you mentioned that you did have a number of interactions, and I'm sure that God opened doors for you to do that, and probably will continue to, I imagine, when the time is right, when the person maybe is ready. What have you found in this period that has been the most helpful in your conversations with friends from your previous life? What lessons have you learned about how to speak and when to speak, and what topics to discuss?
Well, I mean, firstly, a lot of those conversations haven't happened because friendship itself was something that I consciously placed on God's altar as a sacrifice to him in my journey into consecration, because for me personally in my path, it was something that I felt I could give him in order to be closer to him. It was something that was so some way obstructing our love. So, well, not his love, my love, my devotion. So I don't have, in a way, as much experience of talking to friends from outside Christianity because they don't exist. But at the beginning, there was, like you said, a kind of process of reckoning. And I think God blessed me by giving me the opportunity of seeing both sides. Because on the one hand, I had experiences of talking in a very straightforward way about what was happening, because I was like so new to it, and it was like I literally had just had like my whole reality shattered, and I was just like, okay, this is what I found out, and I need to talk. I didn't think to not say all these words that was so triggering to people and so difficult for people to understand, that I would not talk about so much nowadays, knowing more and having more maturity. But yeah, as you said, it depends. So in terms of like practically, it depends who's in front of you and what they need, and you're going to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit and listen to what it is you're supposed to say that's going to set them free. And for one person, it might be actually just saying the bold truth of the gospel that's going to be earth-shattering, but might allow them to just break out of a certain mindset. And for someone else, like, you're going to have to lead them really, really gently and really, really passively. What I regretted is that sometimes there were certain situations where it wasn't from what I said directly, but it was from sharing information, Christian information, just normal Christianity being spoken about, but that for anyone in the New Age is like completely mind-bending and totally traumatic to hear because of the fragility as well that comes with that way of being. And it made me sad that they didn't have the experience of the life of Christ, because that's what I experienced. In terms of the way to go is, for sure, is how my elders went about it, which is that they were always honest. But for a long period, both from when I met my spiritual father, which was in February, and then I flew out to the monastery that December, nothing was said in that period. And then when I was in the monastery, none of the nuns, I had like maybe one conversation with my sister because I was bringing it up, but they were all, and if they were like examples of soft power in like, it's like absolute blessed action, didn't say anything, because I would have fought them and with my mind might have won, but like I wouldn't have spiritually won, obviously. So, and they allowed knowing God will work and speak to me in a way that I understand. And my father, he didn't also. So I was so blessed by that. So that's something that I want to, and I do give those who, for the most part, if someone's brought into my view or my care, like that's how I'm going to go about it. There are certain situations where someone needs to hear the truth because they're bound in a certain way, even though they might not like you for saying it. It's going to be, you're the person that has to say it. And I think that God uses us in certain points. And so as a Christian, we have to be alert to knowing when we're supposed to say and not say, because I think there's a tendency, obviously, to just not say it at all because you don't want to offend anyone and you don't want to make people not like you, basically. And you want to be pleasing, but this is then also losing a lot of opportunities for people to be delivered. And this is not something that we should be encouraging in any way, because that is our role, is to help people come and have real life, even if we lose their friendship in the process. I think that Orthodoxy has a lot of strengths in that it can draw people through so many different things. For example, like at the moment, my generation is super into sacred arts and would be easily, the arts is something that they can it's like palatable to them, and they're going to be able to engage like on an intellectual level, and then like see, okay, this is the craft, and like, oh, this is all this cultural depth and richness, and then like, and I think that God is using that and to draw a lot of people into deeper relationship with him. For me, it was through asceticism. It was through the seeing sacrifice in action, seeing purification, seeing the results of it. So there's so many things, but we have to draw them all the way. Don't want to just like leave someone on the outskirts and thinking that like, hey, this is great, everything's fine. And then also as a Christian, you can also lose a lot of your grace, lose a lot of your fire if you spend too long paddling around in like these lukewarm waters. It's going to actually affect you. So we need to maintain like the focus of like, the end point of this is not for me to have loads of Orthodox or semi-Orthodox friends and have a nice life in the church. It's in order to these people to get free at the sacrifice of my own pleasure and my own happiness, temporarily at least. So those would be some thoughts I'd say in response to your question. But I think the most important thing is just the witness of what the saints give us, what the elders give us, which is that they knew they were able, because of their own purification, they were able to see the person inside them, know what was in their heart, know what was binding them, and say a word that would set them free. And that's what we are obviously aiming towards and need to cultivate.
So, given your experiences outside of Christianity and then coming into Christianity, and now from within the monastery, what would you say that that an Orthodox Christian living in 2025 should prioritize above other things?
I think that thing that is like really being cried out for is like the fervency and the fire for God and for living holy life, and the difficulty of attaining holiness and its necessity. So I think that is something that we, in our conversations, as those who are speaking in the church and having this blessed opportunity to talk in these kind of environments, like these kind of contexts, is there's such a temptation, I think, to like rearrange a lot of things that are not the key thing. But ultimately, unless we're able to get to that place of like intimacy with Christ, where we are spending our everyday, the first thing that we think about is him, and he comes like our beloved, and he's with us in such a way that, well, if he's with us in this way, everything in our life will change. And a lot of the discussions that we have actually don't need to be discussed anymore, because it's like he is walking before us and shrouding us with this grace, and that people will come and experience this grace, and they will have experiences of the living spirit. And I think that that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that the reason why I had what I had is because it was like this living encounter with the living God through someone who had sacrificed and sacrificed and sacrificed to the point that there was this vacancy in him that allowed for Christ to be in him, and that he loves Christ in such a way that's like so potent, and like his heart is beating. And when you encounter that, you don't need words or teaching. And he didn't teach, he didn't say anything about like the life I was living. It was through this encounter and seeing his example of sacrifice, seeing his example of this fire for living out the gospel on the gospel's terms, not living out the gospel according to how we've reformulated it, according to our cultural context that feels comfortable for us, and not diluting the message of the scriptures. And I think that that's something that is easy to get lost, is that the living word, the scriptures have, like, they are alive and they will change our life if we engage with them. But we so frequently don't, because we'd rather do many other things, a lot of things which seem spiritual. But the thing that has changed my life and changed me as a person and released me from bondage after bondage after bondage has come as a result of eating the word of God and internalizing it and being healed by it, both changing the way my mind thinks because of the concepts of actually like thinking differently theologically, but more, and this is for me because I have a real struggle with distracted mind. Like, I have such an easily distracted mind, so my mind wanders all the time. It's like a very big issue that I have, and I can't. So a lot of my engagement with scripture, the only way it was working was mystical, because I was not taking in what I was reading. I was reading as in one ear, out the other. I could read a passage and I can't tell you anything that I've just read, but I'd read it again and again and again, knowing this word is alive, it's healing me, it's changing me, and it's changing me into my divine image. And the changes that have been made through that. So if you have the power of a really focused mind, it's seriously something like the power that can come through those changes and how you can affect other people's lives around you and change the world by changing other people's lives, by changing yourself, is something that's so mystical and wonderful. And as Christians, we need to show people that this is possible, that it's real. So we have to cultivate it. We have to become perfect, as God, our Father in heaven, is perfect. And that's obviously really hard, but there is really no other option. And I think that's the thing, is like any kind of, it doesn't matter, like everyone sins and like, it's okay, we're just humans. Like, this way of thinking, this worldly way of thinking, is going to be the thing that's going to stop us from acquiring the holiness that is necessary for the living Spirit to be with us in a palpable way that changes people's lives. Because the teaching has gone out, and we live in a world where there's so many words, and so many words are wasted, and everything's been said, and everyone's so well read and intelligent and clever and, saturated with knowledge. But the knowledge of God and his mind is so far away. So if we have this direct mystical connection with the Spirit, it will just in that moment heal all the things that can be healed in taking such a long time through other processes, taking so long, and sometimes even not even succeeding in their intended goal. But Christ himself, if he is allowed to work through us, is the thing that is going to be able to change everything. So it's our priority, is to acquire that holiness, and to just be so strict, but not in a way that's oppressive, but just in a way that's liberating, because it's his example, and it's divine to follow the divine example.
You're working on a new book, and you have a blog. Will you continue to post to the blog? And what are you at liberty to talk about the new book?
I'm glad you're saying that, because I wanted to talk about the Substack just so that people can read it who'd be interested. So the Substack is Apocalypse. Yeah, I love it. It's so wonderful. I can't believe that what happened with Apocalypse happened. I cannot believe. I can't believe anything that's happened in my life. It's beyond my understanding, my ability to process. People ask me, how are you feeling about everything? I'm just like, I don't feel anything, because it's literally beyond my ability to process what is happening. And that's my whole answer. It's the truth. It's so wild. God is alive. He's the God of miracles. He is so faithful, and he is so loving. What he did in my life and is doing is beyond anything that anyone would be able to make up. But in terms of the Substack, basically the Substack is like a practical exposition of the inside of experiencing Christian theology, the mystical side of it. And it's about the mystical, it's about the practical, it's about doing it and putting it into practice and living it out, and all of the amazing things that happen when you begin to live out Christian life. And I talk on the post a lot about the path to holiness. It's kind of the framework for it, is that we are walking the path to holiness, and these are all the things that happen on the path to holiness. And it's about this revelation of the mystery that comes through living it out. Basically, it comes through experiencing it, and it's about consecration. It's essentially how to consecrate your life in simple terms, but not in the terms of becoming monastic, but in terms of becoming, I think, as any Christian, they feel this call to go deeper and deeper and deeper. But how, and what do I need to do? How do I actually make that happen? And so it's kind of like signs along the way, things that you can do, and things that we need to do, things that are our responsibility to do. So it's kind of unique. It's not, in terms of my other writing, it's not like cultural commentary. It does touch on things, but it's about the inside experience of the Spirit, and coming close to the Spirit and having him close in your life. That's what Apocalypse is about. And the book that I'm writing is the second book, actually, which I didn't know existed, but it's come out. So I'm writing it, and I'm a significant part of the way through. It's a continuation of the story, but so if the first part was about deliverance and exodus from the outer darkness, this is about journey into bridal love and consecration, and the aftermath of the spiritual shift that took place in my life of conversion, and also converting from the world that I was in. And yeah, so that's what the second book, and I'm hoping to finish it quite soon so that it can keep living quickly. But that's just, the monastic way we do, like, you're working, because as we all are, actually, as all Christians are, we're working against the clock. So yeah.
For sure. And yeah, the last question was regarding, what you would say to your younger self about spiritual realities.
Well, I think that's the thing I would say. I don't know if this is the answer that you're looking for, but God, I think the most important thing, and this is something that we learn through our journey with Christ, is that He knows us in this special way, and He has a life plan for us. He has a calling for us. Each of us have callings, divine callings, but we have to discover them and then live them out, and they may not be exactly how we want our life to be. And if we try and mix our divine calling with this life that we want that isn't God's plans for our life, then our calling will never be fully able to be fully released, and we won't receive the blessedness of it. So I just, for my younger self, my whole life could have been about the Spirit, and that's the thing that is where all my energy flows. That is where my strength is. That is where my abilities are. Had I known that, my life would be very different indeed, and I probably would have been able to help many people, but I didn't know that. And so I think that the most important thing for us to know in looking at our life is that we have a divine calling. This divine calling is opposed by information that is given to us that tells us that everything that we are and that God created us to be and do is not what we're meant to do with our life. And it puts in all these other oppositional drives, and it puts in a whole life path ahead of us that takes us totally away from who we are. For example, I'm a bride, but I became a feminist. And so if we know this, we can then become more alert to these spiritual realities that are taking place, to the battle, to the dynamic, to the fact that we have so much power. The human being has so much power. We don't know this, that our place in creation, what God wants to give us and do through us. So if we're aware of this divine calling that needs to be discovered within ourselves, give ourselves time to discover it, cultivate this life of holiness, because our spirits need holiness, and we all have spirits, and allow ourselves to live according to the rules of the Spirit and the laws of God and the mind of Christ and the scriptural commandments. No matter what is happening around us, our life will be good, and everything is going to turn out for the best. And this is a post I was going to write on my Substack, which is like, success equals doing God's will for your life. Whatever God's will for your life, if you do it, your life is going to be a success, because you're going to be with God. And anything that if you don't, even if you have outwardly every single like every form of riches and every kind of success and fame and everything, if you're not living according to God's will for your life, if you haven't discovered this divine calling inside you, your whole life will come to nothing and you will help no one. So this is probably the thing that I would say to my younger self, and to just say, by the way, you just don't know how much God loves you, and that everything that God is good.